Today I'm going to show you how to build the complete core, but just a quick caveat guys, this is not how you are going to get a six-pack if you are overweight. That is going to be purely a function of whether or not you are in a calorie deficit, not whether or not you are training those muscles. But it's extremely important that we do have well-developed, strong, stable core musculature, and so I'm going to show you the best exercises for that. Firstly, we've got flexion and extension of the spine. Today we're just going to focus on flexion. The next movement is lateral flexion, and the final movement is rotation of the spine. With each of those movements that I've mentioned, here are the muscles that we're going to be focusing on. The rectus abdominis, that's the muscle that's responsible for you having a six-pack, and the internal and external obliques. So the first movement that we're going to look at is flexion, and the muscles that will be involved in this are the rectus abdominis and the internal and external obliques. For each of those exercises, I'm going to show you a dynamic movement and a static movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the crunch, and I'm going to include some tips that you might not have heard before. First thing that I want you to do, because we're focusing on getting flexion through the spine, we're going to actually start by flexing the lumbar spine. So we want the tailbone to come up off the floor, kind of like in a hollow body. Once we've done that, we obviously want to encourage flexion from the upper body. So we're going to reach the hands diagonally forwards, and then I want you to reach the hands diagonally up to get that flexion, and then you'll feel that in the abs before you slowly release down. Now it's really important that when you do this, I'm already shaking because I'm already holding that position, I'm engaged, and we hold at the top momentarily, come back down, try and keep that tension before we go again, okay? Typically most people would kind of start in a position like this and they're just reaching up like so, or reaching all the way forwards like so. We want to bring in as much control as possible into the movement to really ensure that we are engaging all the muscles that we've talked about, the rectus abdominis and the internal and external obliques. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to train that flexion isometrically. So we're kind of resisting flexion. And a great movement for this is the hollow body plank. The reason why is because as the tailbone comes down and as the shoulder blades round, we're in a very flexed position, and you'll feel that your abdominals will come into tension when you do this. So I have got a video that fully breaks this movement down, but just for some quick pointers, this is what it looks like. Hands directly under the shoulders. If you've done a cat-cow before, I recommend that you go from your cow into your cat, and then that's going to ensure that we've got the tailbone rounding down and the shoulder blades rounded. Stick one leg back, other leg back, keep the tailbone down, push hard, and from here you should feel your abdominals really contracting. That's going to be the best way to do a plank. So our next movement is lateral flexion, and that's going to stimulate the internal and the external obliques. And so I want to show you two exercises for the dynamic portion of this movement. The first one is going to be stimulating that from the bottom up. And so we're going to grab a kettlebell or a heavy dumbbell, and we're going to be doing side bends. Now the way to do this, once you've picked this up, obviously stabilize the upper body first. I want you to ensure that your tailbone is down so that your glutes are in tension, and that's going to minimize movement through the hips. Then drop your shoulder towards the floor and go as far down as you can before the opposite shoulder you pull back into that neutral position. The internal and external obliques that are actually going to be working are the ones on the opposite side as they come and contract and bring you back to a neutral position. Now, as you saw with that side bend, because it was this side working, when we returned to neutral, it wasn't fully flexed. So even though we got that full lengthen of the internal and external obliques, we just got a partial, almost a partial shortening there. So something that we can do is a nice top-down movement, starting in a neutral, and from here, we're going to use our internal and external obliques on this side to fully contract on the way down. So here and up. Now it's important that we keep the tailbone tucked down again to minimize any hip movement, and we try and isolate this movement as much as possible. I'm focusing on driving my armpit to the floor as opposed to pulling this. Okay, this isn't really doing anything. It's just armpit goes to the floor and then I come back. And I just come back to that neutral position again. One more movement that we can do that's going to help bring about some stability. It's going to be an isometric movement that's going to help resist us going into excessive laterally flexed position. So basically what I mean is being able to hold this position here and resist lateral flexion. And suitcase carries are going to be great for that. So what we can do is simply just pick up a nice heavy weight and hold it there. Now for more of a challenge, if we start to move the hips, which are going to have an impact on the movement up the body, that's going to actually force us to need to stabilize the spine even more. And so we can simply just do a nice heavy suitcase walk and try and stay as balanced as possible. And that's going to ensure that we are still keeping tension in the internal and external obliques. So the final movement that we want to look at today is rotation. This is really going to stimulate the internal and external obliques. And just so you know where those muscles are, so the external obliques originate from the ribs and they go down into the hip, whereas the internal obliques originate from the hips and they go up into the ribs, amongst other areas. And so they kind of work together across the body. And so we're going to take advantage of that in our first exercise. Because they're going up in this motion here, the fibers are running up. To fully lengthen the internal oblique on this side and the external oblique on this side, we want to reach up and over the shoulder. And to fully contract, we want to bring the hands down into the hip and curl the shoulder into the hip to fully contract it. Now, the best way to bring resistance to that movement is once again to use a band, because we're going to be creating resistance all the way through the movement rather than just parts of the movement, which will be the case if we were to use, say, a medicine ball. So we are back to the band. Now, any exercise which uses a band, you can use a cable. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to assume a start position whereby those muscles that I talked about, internal, external obliques, are fully lengthened, all right? So here I can feel I'm fully lengthened, okay? Now from here, I'm bringing my tailbone down just to minimize some hip movement so that we're just isolating the movement of the spine, which is going to help to isolate the muscles that I talked about. And from here, I'm going to drive this shoulder down to the floor and this shoulder into this hip, okay? That's the main thing I'm looking at doing before I go all the way back up and then rotate all the way in and then go all the way back up like so. So the movement that we're going to perform now is the Palloff Press, and this is going to help resist those rotational movements. And because I'm pulling from the right, I'm training the external oblique on my right side and the internal oblique on my left side. So starting position, bend your knees slightly, try and keep tension in your lower body. So I just push my knees out and I feel that, I'm fully grounded. Once I've done that, I pull the bands in. Obviously you can use a cable as well, and I'm feeling tension. If I don't feel tension, I take a little step away, but that's absolutely fine. I don't want to push myself too hard. And then from here, what you can do is push the hands out, and that's going to really call on your abdominals or your internal and external obliques to resist that rotation before you come back, okay? Now to make this hard, you can keep the hands out and just time this for, let's say, 10 to 30 seconds, or you can do repetitions of the movement so that we're getting varying degrees to the extent to which your internal and external obliques are called upon to help resist that rotational force. So there you have it, guys, the ultimate core training guide. Now, when it comes to programming, I recommend that you train your abdominals 2 to 3 times per week, and as with any other muscle group, leave a day's rest in between. In terms of sets per week, we just want to bring these under the broad term of abs. So even if we're training the internal, external obliques and the rectus abdominis, we're just going to call those abs. And so we want to do 16 sets total per week to begin with. That'll be absolutely fine. And in terms of repetitions, pick a range from 8 to 20 reps. I'd recommend that within that, you are picking a range of just 2 reps. For example, you're going to do 8 to 10 reps and then run that for a block of, say, 4 weeks. And you can use the double progression method, whereby you work towards doing 3 sets of 10 of an exercise before increasing the resistance in some way, going back down to 8 reps, and then again working up to 3 sets of 10 by the end of that block. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you found that useful, and I'll see you in the next video.